College football nerds, if you are watching us, that means we are back from the off season because we do leave in the off season, and that means we're really close to college football. And to start out this season, we are talking Texas Longhorn preview. Texas fans, get in the comments, let us know what you think about your season, what it's going to look like, and we're going to talk to you about what we think. Josh has been doing a little deep dive, and I have got something, Josh, that I want to talk to you about first. And in the comments, y'all let me know as I'm saying this if you know what I'm talking about. If you're Texas fans, you know. If you're not a Texas fan and you figured out, it's going to be even more impressive. Josh, does this list of teams ring a bell to you or tell you anything or remind you of anything or make you think of anything? What does this list of teams mean? If you don't know, that's okay. Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Arkansas, LSU, USC, Notre Dame, UCLA, Ole Miss. What do those teams mean to you in a discussion about Texas football?
Give me the list one more time.
Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Arkansas, LSU, USC, Notre Dame, UCLA, Ole Miss, and for fun, UCLA again.
Out of conference games for Texas?
Out of conference games, I want to go on a celebration tour in our preseason discussions, Josh, about teams who put their beans on the line and play big time out of conference games. And I don't know if there's maybe Clemson. We talked about them on Twitter a little bit, but there's a team out there that does it better than Texas and Ohio State, who we're going to talk about in a minute. Those are the teams, and in several of those, Josh, there's home and home. So Alabama, USC, Notre Dame twice, Ole Miss twice, UCLA twice. You can go back 15, 20 years. Texas is playing big dogs out of conference, Josh, and I think that needs to be celebrated now more than ever when teams are hiding away from playing teams out of conference. And I don't blame them because the landscape is such that that's the way you get in the playoffs, and that's become the ultimate goal. But in an era when you don't have to do that, and Texas, I want to back up and say this too, and then I'm going to let you talk, Josh. We said on Twitter, we said it on the show, Texas SEC schedule last year was easy. That's not Texas' fault. Like, they can't help that Florida wasn't great. Florida had been great. I think they did an average of teams' histories to decide who plays who. They can't help their schedule. We've said that about other teams in the past. They can help who they play out of conference, and they're scheduling dudes out of conference, and for that, they should be absolutely celebrated.
I mean, they've scheduled the returning national champion 2 years in a row, right, with Michigan and Ohio State. Texas can't help the fact that when you go down the list, Florida, Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas A&M, those teams haven't been what they've been in previous years. I mean, Georgia was a very good team last year. They were not the juggernaut they were in the period where they were winning multiple national titles back-to-back. Maybe shoulda, coulda, woulda played for a third one. Would have in the new playoff era when they lost to Alabama in the SEC title. There was a down year for Georgia. It was still a very good team. Texas lost that game. And the problem for Texas, we talked about this last season, it was kind of unfortunate that the way the schedule broke out, and it's not their fault, that they lose to Georgia, and it becomes really hard to talk about all the great wins you have, not because they didn't take care of business. I mean, they stomped Florida. They looked very good throughout the year. A lot of metrics, including our own, had them as one of the top teams in the country. I think we had them, top 3, top 4. The problem was they just didn't have their opponents step up to play. It's not their fault that they scheduled a returning national champion in Michigan, and Michigan just doesn't know how to play offense anymore. Almost like they were missing something, some sort of knowledge about games. We'll leave that out there for all the Michigan fans to ponder over, and definitely not rage at me on Twitter. But I mean, Texas did everything they want to do, or everything you can expect. I mean, if you're scheduling the returning national champion, you're obviously being aggressive. You do it 2 years in a row, you're very, very clearly being aggressive. And, when you look at it this season, the schedule, I mean, they may only have a few ranked games, but Daniel, the few ranked games they have are teams that not a lot of people in the country can beat, period. So I think you got to give a lot of props to Texas for scheduling the way they have. It takes a lot of confidence because they believe they're going to make a bowl game, right? If you're doing that, you're saying we're going to be a good team. we're going to play somebody really tough. We don't care if we lose that game or win that game. We want to be challenged, and we feel like we can make our, if we play Ohio State and they're the number one team in the country, they're the best team all year, and we lose that game, we think we can still make a playoff. We think we can still win the SEC title. That's not a big deal. We'd rather be challenged. That's the mindset you want to have as a football program. It gives you something, I think, to be motivated for. And something I'll say is teams that play those games, I think, have a big advantage through the season because it is a big driver when you're in camp to be better prepared, to be better engaged for football players. So I definitely commend Texas for this. It's not a new thing. Texas has done this for years. I'll give credit to Ohio State in the video we're doing, Alabama, the video we're doing there. All those teams have done really good jobs of scheduling out of conference. I mean, there's a reason Texas has played both of them in recent years. And so whatever you want to say about their schedule, and I really, we'll talk about it a little bit in terms of prognostication. I don't want to do anything to ding them for it. They play in the SEC. They did not set the SEC schedule. They have one of the easier SEC schedules, yes, but they did everything they could to make it harder. And, it's not their fault that their little brother down the road just seems to be stuck in an eternal 8-4 season.
And the thing that's funny about that is, are you talking about Texas A&M or are you talking about Oklahoma? Because those are two, at least big-time football schools that haven't done their part. Texas is bringing the team to the table. Texas is coming to the Cotton Bowl with a team, right? Texas going into Texas A&M with a team, and it's the other side that's not meeting them. They can't be blamed for that, like you said. And here's the other thing. You're talking about that week 1 game against Ohio State. It's hard. Like week 1 is so much harder than week 2 because all of your new pieces are doing their thing for the first time. So you don't have any of that muscle memory of what to call in certain situations and how your quarterback's going to react, how your defense is going to react, things like that. It's new for both sides. So, yes, you've got 3 cake games after Ohio State before you travel to Florida, but you're going at Ohio State, at Florida in your first 5 games. Meanwhile, looking at just the opposite end of the spectrum, Penn State opens with Nevada, Florida International, Villanova off week before they play Oregon. Oregon, by the way, has no off week before they play Penn State. They play Oregon State the week before. So that is a completely other situation. And I say all this to say, when it comes into the year and we're looking at, Texas' schedule ended up kind of soft, but, Penn State played Ohio State. Well, Penn State's biggest game on their schedule is one that Texas scheduled and they didn't have to. And so I want people to remember that, like, if we're looking at Penn State and Texas at the end of the year and where we should put them, Penn State had 3 cakes to start the season and an off week before one of their maybe 2 ranked games they'll play this year. All right, I'm enough on the schedule game. One more thing I'll have to say. I just said enough. I lied. Vanderbilt beat 2 Power 4 teams out of conference last year. Texas will not get any credit for beating them this year if they're good, if they're 8-4, 9-3 type team. Texas won't get any credit for that. But it's not fair because they also don't get any credit for beating Oklahoma. So they beat the brand name that didn't have a good team, but they beat the non-brand name that did have a good team, didn't get credit for either one. That's not fair. All right, Josh, I want you to get us going, maybe with just talking through some of the pieces that are coming back, some of the pieces that have maybe left, and maybe the question marks that we got there.
Obviously, the thing that really defines Texas football this year is the change at quarterback, right? I mean, everybody wants to talk about Arch Manning versus Quinn Ewers. We talked about a lot in prior years, Daniel, and I'll steal your thunder. Maybe you can talk about it, right? We're never been that high on Quinn Ewers, and it's something I think a lot of Texas fans have held against us. But maybe take a step back and realize we're at least logically consistent. Because we haven't been that high on Ewers as a quarterback for many years, I also don't think it's a huge loss. I do think it's very reasonable to think that Arch Manning may be a better quarterback than Ewers. And look, I don't think Arch Manning has to be the Heisman Trophy winner to be better than Ewers. At least, hey, let's at least meet in the middle and say a Ewers who was banged up as he was last year, had, a torso injury, never really was healthy through his career at Texas consistently. If they have a healthy Arch Manning, they may be better there. When you look at the rest of the roster, though, I mean, you've got really big impact players. Anthony Hill, probably the best inside linebacker in the country, in my opinion. Colin Simmons, one of the very best edge rushers. There are a few of those guys, including one at South Carolina, that have maybe can make an argument for being the best one, but he's certainly in that group. Guys like Taft that I think are not just glue pieces, but just high performant, consistent players. And they got those guys on the other side of the ball. Running back room. Look, the running back room was a group that going into last year was supposed to be a strength. And due to injuries, it kind of fell off. And I think this year, with the emergence of Wisner, with guys coming back from injury, that could be a strong group. It's also a team that's recruited generally around averaging about the number 3 class over the last several years. But on the flip side, Daniel, we got to talk about what they don't bring back. So, like they lose 3 first-round draft picks. They lose 6 draft picks in the rounds 1 through 3, 12 draft picks total. That is a school record for Texas. It is very hard for any team, Daniel. We talked about this with many teams over the years to replace 12 draft picks. Now, if you're a top 3 finish, you can do that. Georgia did it when they had back-to-back national titles. They had a record number of draft picks. But it is extremely rare. It's more common, like what happened with Michigan last year. LSU in 2019 had a record number of draft picks. I believe they had 14, which I think may have been the modern record, or that maybe Michigan tied or broke. Those teams typically take something of a step back. Within that group, Texas replaces 4 offensive line starters. They replace the top 5 leading tacklers on the defensive line. Every defensive lineman, not edge pass rusher, which I know is a big caveat, but every defensive lineman with at least 5 tackles is gone, which is a crazy stat. They also must replace their top 3 pass catchers. So, when you have Arch, you have Hill, Collins, Wingo, it's kind of an interesting game to say how far does that get you, right? How far are you going to get with having, somebody like Ethan Burke that can step into a key role? How far are you going to step forward with Colin Simmons, who seems to be an emerging player? It's a tale of two sides, Daniel. And a lot of what really you have to feel about Texas is how much do you trust this coaching staff? How much do you trust their ability to evaluate and develop talent? They've certainly recruited at a high level. Really, I think, let's throw out what was on paper with some of those Mac Brown classes. I think they've recruited at a much higher level than Mac Brown did. Whatever the class ranks were with Brown, these I think are better talents. They recruited more nationally. I think they did a better job of waiting and seeing who was actually going to have a senior season. Brown was notorious for filling up his classes early, and some of those guys didn't pan out, but they still kept them. So, do you give them the benefit of the doubt? And, Daniel, I'll posit you should. Based on what they've done the past couple of years, making the playoffs, based on, I think, Sarkisian's track record, based on the type of guy they're recruiting, the level at which they're recruiting, we have every reason to give Texas the same benefit of the doubt we would Georgia or Alabama. And so I think there are some really big impact players. I think they're question marks, but I certainly think, even though we put on Twitter, and I'll say, hey, I put on Twitter, I don't understand maybe why Texas is the undisputed number 1 team in a lot of rankings, given how many changes there are. But I just don't maybe understand why everyone is in agreement, because I think they have as many holes as anyone else. I certainly understand why they're in the conversation. And so, Daniel, would you agree with that? I mean, do you think Texas is far and away the number 1? I mean, do you think they're easily in the conversation and wait and see, or do you think I'm wrong on all this?
I think it all has to be framed within the context of where we are in college football. We haven't had a lot of preseason discussions about teams where we do previews and they could lose 2, maybe 3 games and still win a national championship. So, we're doing an Ohio State preview later, and that is a scenario for them where if I was doing a preview for this Ohio State team 3 years ago or even 2 years ago, I would say I don't have them as a real national title contender because, new OC, new DC, new quarterback, that's too much to overcome even for an elite program because you can only lose 1 game. But in the context of the new world, I can't imagine Texas not being in that conversation. And a lot of it, I've ironically seen a lot of the chatter from Ohio State fans because they did beat Texas, and they're like, Arch ain't nothing. Like, he came in for one play and he was quickly removed and he couldn't hack it. And it's like, one play when you're not taking QB1 reps, when you just came in here or there in spot duty to get a first down. I, I don't think, like, comparing that to a guy who spent a spring and fall camp at number one, that's ridiculous to me. So from that standpoint, I think that we don't know what we don't know about Arch. So on the flip side of it, everybody that's saying Arch is going to just ball out, he might. But it's probably somewhere in the middle, at least for year one, though I do think sitting last year helped him a lot. But I do want to stress this because your point about us being consistent is true. We haven't been high on Ewers, and a lot of it last year maybe was injury. If he's got that, oblique injury and he can't run at all, and then you've got Arch coming in who maybe isn't, at least year one as good at progressions and, leading guys and throwing people open, but he's got enough ability in the run game to keep the defense honest. Well, that opens up the pass for him a lot more. So I do think that gives Sark some options offensively that he didn't have with admittedly a banged up quarterback that he was playing all year. That does beg the question, Josh, and I'm going to ask this same in our Alabama preview because they're dealing with the same thing. You have a guy waiting in the wings who's a 5-star quarterback who has shown in spurts that he can throw it around and that he is competent on the field. Alabama had this. Texas had this. What does it say to you if Arch comes out and does ball out? Does that tell you that Sark made the wrong decision last year leaving him on the bench?
I think that's a difficult thing to say. I mean, in both, there's a lot of parallels, right? Both teams have a quarterback that made a playoff semifinal, lost the respective semifinals, came back, were senior players on those teams, really were kind of viewed as leaders on those teams, carried the team, through the season, had some up and downs. But, I mean, with Ewers, I'll say it's a little different than Jalen Milroe, that I don't know that there were huge downs, right? I mean, in terms of our statistics, passing offense per attempt, I mean, Texas ended up the season versus expected it down at 16th. That's maybe not as high as people might think. I mean, it's behind a lot of other teams, Alabama included, actually, in yards per attempt offensively, but it's certainly very good. And so I don't know if there's enough to bench him. And from what I saw of Arch Manning, I saw a tremendous amount of potential, but I also saw a kid that maybe wasn't quite ready. And I'll say the same thing, and it'll probably come up again in the Alabama preview, Daniel. I do have a lot of faith that Sarkisian, who's coached a lot of teams and a lot of quarterbacks, knows what he's doing. And even if Manning comes out and he lights the world on fire this year, I don't think you can make an assumption that he would have been that same guy last year, based on his understanding of the scheme probably being built more for Ewers than it was for Manning. Look, there's a lot that goes into it, and Manning is just not going to be the same guy he was in August of 2024. It's just not going to be true. So even if he's that way, Simpson's that way for Alabama, you'll never know. I think people are always going to question it. I think probably there's something to be said about whether or not Ewers was a limiter, because my big concern with him is, in big games where timing got tight, he had to make quick decisions, I felt like sometimes he really struggled. And he really was an inconsistent deep ball passer through the entirety of his career. Golden made Ewers maybe look a little better than he was last year, is my honest opinion. And I think, when you look at the NFL draft, it does back that up, right? I mean, Ewers was not a guy having his name called early, despite a lot of people projecting that way. He ends up going in the 7th round. So, my argument for many years.
But that's what you want, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what, I mean, people think it is counterintuitive, but you say this all the time. When you're really high on a guy on your team and he doesn't go that highly, it's a double-edged sword, but there is an upside glass half full sort of way to look at that. Hit us with that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, my point has always been, when you evaluate a team in the offseason, the better your draft class, the lower my expectation should be this year. It's pretty simple. And when you've got a team that has a lot of players that you think were absolute studs and they don't go as high as you think they were off a good team, that's a clue that you're probably not losing as much as you thought you were. And look, there's teams where you thought guys are going to be high round draft picks and they end up not going that high, but the team also didn't perform at the level you thought they would. And Texas has certainly had some defenses that had that, and that's one thing. But when you have a Texas defense that, our metrics, Daniel, scoring defense, we have Texas number 3. Total defense per game, yardage adjusted, we had them the number 2 defense in the country behind only Ohio State. That was a phenomenal defense. And I think the draft kind of bears that out. But when you look at like passing offense, per attempt, again, 16th, not quite what you'd expect from the talent that you thought they were going to have. But Helm goes 4th round, which is a good tight end, but not a world-beating tight end. You had an excellent wide receiver in Golden who got hurt in the playoffs, and you had a quarterback in Ewers that wasn't that high. Even the offensive line, Daniel, right? They replaced their whole offensive line. You had Kelvin Banks go the 1st round, 9th pick in the draft. He's going to be a guy that's just going to be hard to replace. Even if you have a good offensive tackle, he's going to be hard to replace at that level. But you look at the rest of the offensive line, right? You get the center that goes undrafted. Connor goes 6th round. Cameron Williams goes 6th round. These were not guys that were going that high across the board. And what that tells me is they were a very, very good offensive line, which they were, but partly due to continuity, partly due to experience. And it's a lot like Michigan, a couple of Michigan's teams in recent years where they were NFL caliber, borderline, but they were really experienced and together. And this is where recruiting comes in. I think a lot of the guys they have waiting in the wings to get starting roles are probably more talented than the guys that just left. So the ceiling for that team is high. And I say all that too, Daniel, to say, I think at the beginning of the year, like playing Ohio State, there's going to be growing pains. Now, growing pains versus the team that lost just as much or more. But in the 12-team playoff era, Texas does not have to win the Ohio State game. They don't have to win every game in the first half of the year. If they go 10-2, they're in the playoff. I think they're just in the playoff period. And so the thing with all this is a lot of these things to me, offensive and defensive line, lack of continuity, I think that may create some problems due to just a lack of cohesion at the front, which usually matters early. But from a talent perspective, having 5 transfers on the defensive line, a lot of talent there, a lot of talent back on them out, all the talent on the offensive line, a lot of guys that also played meaningful snaps due to injuries in recent years. I think at least by the end of the year, they could be very good. And, all across the board, skill position talent everywhere. I feel like everywhere on that team, there is an argument they are more talented, like running back, right? You get your star running back from injury that might be better than a Wisner. They have a chance to be better from a talent perspective than they were last year. I think the question is how long does it take to gel? And that question is a heck of a lot less important in the 12-team playoff era than it maybe was in years previous.
And all that talk about Ewers, I do think he was a steal where he was drafted, but I would be willing to bet that Arch Manning would get drafted higher today, having played, I think he started 1 game in his entire career, and it was against Mississippi State. Josh, let's take a quick look at the schedule as we wrap this up. And, we don't predict playoffs. We don't predict conference championship games when we do these, but we do try to give a prediction on what we think the schedule results are going to turn out to be. I've got 11-1 for Texas, and that one isn't Georgia or Ohio State. Just looking at it right now. That's what I think.
So I think it's probably unrealistic for any team, frankly, to go 2-0 versus Ohio State and Georgia. Not saying Texas won't do it. I think Texas is in the same tier. We had conversations about this, right? And I said it early in the video, and I don't know if there's pitchforks or not pitchforks. I never know. I think Texas is clearly a top 5 team this year. I personally think, and it's going to be a theme in a few previews we do, I don't think there's a clear team in the number 1, number 2, number 3 slot that has all their ducks in a row, all their problems figured out. I think Texas has the most clear star power, and I think that's why they're going to be a trendy pick. They also, though, probably have the most turnover in the big ugly, offensive line of scrimmage positions of anybody in the top group. Um, and so when you put all that together, I do think they have every chance to be the team that's number one at the end of the year. I truly do. But I also think we don't really know, and I also don't think those advantages are clear enough for me right now to say they go 2-0, because to go 2-0 against high level teams, you usually have to be a lot better than them. Most of the time, you're going to split them 1-1 at most. So I mean, looking at this schedule, Daniel, I'm more prone to say 11-1. I think 12-0 would be very, very, very hard. 10-2 is also quite possible, and let me be clear, 10-2 is very possible to me with this schedule, with them being a true elite national champion, even odds team. Just because Georgia and Ohio State are going to be probably so good. And one of, I do think, I know Texas fans, you can plug your ears if you want. I think Oklahoma's going to be a lot better. I think defensively they're going to be good. Last year, the wide receiving core was just absolutely decimated. It was laughable when they played Auburn, didn't have their top 5 wide receivers. Look, they didn't have a guy that would have made the 3 deep at Texas. And I know the receiving core right now is not going to set the world on fire, but it's a heck of a lot better what they had. I think they have a quarterback that's going to be pretty good. I don't think Oklahoma is as good as Texas. I just don't. I mean, they're not on the same level. I don't think Texas A&M is as good as Texas. But Oklahoma is going to be a team that I think is more dangerous. Texas A&M is a team that's more dangerous. Florida, probably going to be a team that's more dangerous. And I say this a lot. If you have an 80% chance to win a game and you play 3 teams that you have an 80-85% chance of beating, the odds of you dropping one are actually pretty significant. And you play 4 of those, and all of a sudden, more likely than not, you probably do drop one. Just the way the odds work. So, I do think they probably drop one of Ohio State and Georgia. I do, and I think they're mainly because I think those 3 teams are all pretty even. And I think more likely than not, they beat the rest of the field. But I think there's a chance they drop one of them. And even if they beat both those teams, I think there's also a decent enough chance they lose one of the others. So I think 11-1 is more realistic. I do think 10-2 is on the table, and that's not a slight to Texas. I don't think this schedule is as easy as it was last year. But it is a schedule probably with 4 or 5 losable games. I'm guessing probably 3 games, Daniel, that end up being really tough. I couldn't tell you what the third is. I just feel like probably you're going to find one of those teams on that list that ends up being a little better than is anticipated. But, at the end of the day, again, that doesn't really matter. Get to 10-2, get to the playoffs, make a run. And at the end of the day, the overall talent level on this team is good enough to make a great run in the playoffs like Ohio State did last year. They have all the star power you need to do that, and that's what you want as a Texas fan. Beyond that, Daniel, that's all I can say. I mean, I want to, make a point here. Same problem with Alabama. The lack of proper spring games across the country has made it very difficult to evaluate teams at a level that I'm used to doing. And it's a little frustrating, so we're going to have to do more in the first couple weeks of the year. But I do think Texas is as well set up as anybody.
An interesting part about Texas' schedule that I do also think needs to come around come playoff seeding time and be discussed is Ohio State and Georgia are on the road. And then they've got Florida on the road, which is a really tough place to play, even when Florida sucks. And right after that, they've got Oklahoma at a neutral site. So there is some buried challenge in this schedule that isn't, even if Florida's like 8-4 and Oklahoma's like 8-4, 8-4 back to back on the road neutral site is really tough. Back to your percentages discussion. I am worried, and I will be beating this drum at the end of the year. I'm worried Texas isn't, unlike last year where I thought their schedule was pretty easy in general. And by the way, Michigan didn't do their part either. Texas went on the road and smacked them around because Michigan sucked for most of the year, maybe all of the year. I think that it's fair to point out that at Ohio State, at Georgia in the same year is tough. And then your 2 other toughest games on your schedule right in the middle are at Florida, neutral site Oklahoma. That's tough. But looking the reason I like them in Ohio State and Georgia is also for sequencing because they go after Oklahoma, they go Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, bye week, then Georgia. So they have the whole fall practice ahead of Ohio State, and Ohio State still won't have their ducks in a row in the first game. And then they have Georgia coming off of probably three very winnable, easy games and a bye week. I like how that sets up for them. But either way, in our worst case scenario, which I agree is 10-2 for Texas this year, they're in the playoffs. Doesn't matter. 10-2, and you lose if they lost the SEC championship game. 10-3. We saw last year. You're not allowed to ding people for losing conference championship games. SMU. So that gauntlet has already been laid down, and we have seen that those teams they're required to get in. All right, y'all, let us know in the comments what you think about Texas this year. Did we give Texas a fair shake? Because on Twitter, everybody says we hate Texas. It is not true. We just didn't love Quinn Ewers as a first-round type draft pick the way y'all are talking about him. All right, thanks so much, y'all. Look forward to talking to you throughout the season. Y'all got some bangers of some games out there. And yeah, just keep an eye on us. Like, subscribe. We are back. Have a great week. And God bless.